Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. Welcome back to our first podcast of the year 2025. I'm Paul Healy and welcome back to Michael O'Toole.
Hello, Paul. How's things?
Good. I think it was nice to take a bit of a break. We probably took a more of an extended break than we planned to take, and sorry to anybody that may or may not have been listening out for us, but we're back, and hopefully you continue to stick with us. We've a lot to discuss. It has been a particularly busy month, to be fair. There have been a lot of different things happening.
I would like to apologise and say it was squarely Paul Healy's decision to take this elongated break, just for our bosses who are listening.
Our bosses, I don't know if they do listen.
They do.
But look, we enjoy doing this pod. In a way, it is extracurricular to our everyday jobs. Our jobs are quite chaotic. We don't have 9 to 5. We have whatever is happening in the moment, and a lot has been happening in the moment. The first topic that we kind of wanted to get back into for the year were.
Sorry, I'm waving frantically at you. I just want to say one thing before we go on. I agree with you. It's great doing this, but one thing we forgot to do, we asked at the end of last year, we asked for questions from listeners and viewers, and there were quite a few. We didn't get around to doing them, so we'll have to do that at some stage. But just to repeat the invitation, if anybody has any questions that they want answered in a Q&A, DM me or DM Paul on Twitter or Blue Sky or wherever you want. We do value the interaction, and the questions are really, really good, and we will get round to them.
What's Blue Sky?
It's adults' Twitter, Paul. Don't you worry about it.
Okay. Well, yes, yeah. Repeating that, we'll take questions anytime that we can fit them in. We wanted to start today just talking about homicides in the island of Ireland. We deal with suspected murders and all kinds of manners of killings. It's part and parcel of our job. And already this year, there have been 3 homicides, 3 murder investigations where individuals are charged. In two of the cases, 2 individuals are charged and before the courts. It started early this year on the 4th of January, the suspected murder of Paula Canty in Cork. And indeed, I covered that case, and her body was found in an apartment and in the North Cork area. And there is an individual who was before the courts in relation to that. So we are somewhat stifled in what we can talk about. But there is a murder investigation and an individual charged with murder. Then on the 11th of January, Annie Henneman was found dead in her home in Cavan, and her husband also, Henk Henneman, had been found in a serious state, and their son, Danny Henneman, is currently before the courts, and he's charged with murder in relation to that. And he's made no reply after caution, and that's now something that's before the courts as well. And then on the 19th of this year, we're still dealing with and still working on, even up to today, the latest murder investigation in Bray, where a man by the name of Willie Murhouse has sadly lost his life, and there is a Garda murder inquiry in relation to that, and 6 people in custody currently.
Oh. Okay, so just to explain very quickly, we call them homicides because in some cases, and this is just generally, in some cases, people are charged with manslaughter and not murder, so we call them homicides. But there have been 3 homicides this year. You're right, Paul. We're limited in what we can say in the first 2.
But we have
a bit more freedom about Mr. Murhouse. You've covered the murder of Mr. Murhouse. I believe he was stabbed up to 10 times in a playground in Bray.
This is a horrific crime, and when you work on these things, you get little tidbits of information, and some information then comes out later, as you know. Initially, I was told that Mr. Morehouse was found in the playground just off the Bog Hill Road there in Bray around 6 o'clock on Sunday evening, and Sunday just gone. And basically, members of the public, came across Mr. Morehouse in a bad state in the playground, emergency services were called, but I think Gardaí had already been alerted to basically a scrap that had been going on in the nearby vicinity outside shops. And so Gardaí were alerted to that altercation, that fight, basically. And in the meantime, Mr. Morehouse was lying with a stomach injury, having apparently been stabbed. Now, when we first wrote that story and we learned about Mr. Morehouse, we put his picture out on the Sunday, his Monday morning's paper. I was told he'd been stabbed in the stomach. We later learned that he'd been stabbed as many as 10 times. So a brutal and horrific crime. And then some of the other facts that have kind of come out about the Garda investigation, the way that it's going, is that there appeared to be something of an arranged fight that was going on, arranged by Mr. Morehouse and another individual, and they were basically meeting for what we term a straightener. So they were there to fight one another, but I basically was told that he had been ambushed effectively, unexpectedly, that a number of people showed up with weapons, with knives, and attacked him, that he attempted to get away. He stumbled his way injured into the playground, and that's what happened. So there is a huge investigation into this involving the NBCI as well. And 6 individuals have been arrested, 2 of which are juveniles, a number of males, adult males as well. So some are arrested under the Public Order Act and some are arrested under Section 4 of the Criminal Justice Act.
Yes, so I wanted to get into that. So, as part of a Garda investigation, people can be arrested not for the actual crime, but for things in the periphery. So if 2 are arrested under the Section 4 of the Criminal Justice Act, I think it's fair to say that's in suspicion of involvement in the direct death of Mr. House. But the other 4 might be peripheral things. I think it's public order, you said.
Public order, yes, and there were weapons recovered, knives recovered after searches of 7 properties on a halting site in the area, I understand. So, Gardaí have already recovered weapons, some of which are undergoing forensic testing, and they're working to establish whether they may have been used in the suspected murder. There's tensions. Tensions are high in the area, and I think individuals have been, some of them, less than cooperative with Gardaí. Perhaps that might explain why the investigation is going where it's going currently. Only today, the murder investigation has been formally upgraded, although it has been for some time a murder inquiry, because it was manifestly obvious that Mr. Morehouse had been stabbed to death, but they were awaiting the result of the post-mortem to confirm those suspicions, and it's confirmed that he died of stab injuries, and so there is a murder investigation. Maybe by the time we put this podcast out, there may be progress in that. There are individuals still in Garda custody, so they may end up charging people, or they may end up releasing people, depending. We'll see what happens.
So I think Mr. Morehouse would have been a member of the travelling community and would have been quite well known in the Bray area.
Yeah, certainly he was well known. I mean, even people, out at the scene certainly knew of him and of his family. He is a father to 6 children, and I understand he had a 7th child on the way with his wife. His wife is quite heavily pregnant. There have been a number of tributes to him, including his former partner, who called him a good man. So, he's well known in the community, and a father of 6. It is tragic. It's sad, I suppose, that a father of 6 was meeting somebody for a fight, a grown adult man, 36 years of age, meeting somebody for a fight. But nonetheless, no matter what those circumstances, no one deserves to be killed. And what happened to him was clearly and obviously horrific. And there is an added element to this, that perhaps the grudge in question may all, unfortunately, surround the age-old thing of drugs. So there is a suspicion of possible of row in relation to drugs, and that may have led to the murder. Again, whatever the circumstances, Mr. Morehouse did not deserve to lose his life, and it is horrific, and it is considered by Gardaí to be a murder. So, but more and more facts are coming out by the minute, by the day, in relation to this.
I know we're going to talk about homicides in general for last year and possibly this year, but when you think about most of the killings last year, how many of them? Well, I don't think there were any. Let's say there were no gangland gun murders last year, the first time in quite a long time. But I just wonder how many killings are like that of Mr. Harris, that they just develop out of nothing. Do you know what I mean? That something small suddenly becomes something big, and then something big becomes something fatal.
Mm. And yeah, I suppose like that seems to be a wider dispute that has turned into something, uh, deeply personal. An awful lot of the latest crimes that we've covered seem to be more on the familial end of things. That people who are related to each other seem to be getting into disputes and sadly killing their loved ones. The ones we've just mentioned are all suspected to be the case, but I'm even thinking of just a couple that happened right after Christmas. That I actually, when I was initially compiling the list of crimes this month, I thought were only this month. I suppose they've only been a couple of weeks ago, but thinking of the case of Marania Pap down in Athlone, her son Nibosa is currently now charged with her murder. John O'Connor down in New Ross in Wexford, that's someone charged in relation to that, someone known to him. So it seems to be sadly a lot of women being murdered by men known to them. Again, that seems to be the trend. But we were talking about 49 homicides last year, 34 of which are in the Republic.
Yes. So I keep, as you know, a running stat of all the homicides north and south of the border. Conor Feehan in the Indo does it as well, and we sort of compare notes throughout the year. So there were 49 confirmed homicides, according to my notes, in the Republic and Northern Ireland last year. 34 in the Republic, 15 in Northern Ireland. Interestingly, the split by sex is the same. So there were 34 males and 15 females. There are always more men than women who are the victims of homicide. And that's just the way it is. It's just, there's never been, although interestingly, I heard Alison Morris from the Belfast Telegraph was on the Stephen Nolan show in Radio Ulster today. And she said it's interesting, for the first time that she remembers, in Northern Ireland, more women were the victims of homicide than men. So that is quite disturbing. But I was just saying this to you off air, Paul. I mean, this is quite sad. You are talking effectively between 45 and 55 homicides on the island of Ireland every year. We've had 3 so far this year. Interestingly, they've all been in the Republic. But the sad reality is there are about 50 people alive today who by the end of the year will be victims of homicide. Maybe a few more than a few, but that's quite a sobering thought when you think about it, really, isn't it?
It's horrific, and it just feels to me, although you actually have the stats, I suppose, to stand it up, that it is on the increase.
No.
But it's not.
No, I mean, it hasn't. I mean, look, let's talk about this. There were no gangland gun murders last year in Ireland for the first time since I've been covering it, from the first time since the early noughties. There were 4 gun deaths. I think one could be attributed to gangland, but that's up north. The other 3, it's fair to say there are charges laid. I won't get into it, but it's safe to say none of the others would be gangland. So the homicide rate in Ireland is quite steady. It probably is down a bit. Maybe it's because we're so close to it that we think it's increasing all the time.
Yeah,
but it's not.
I feel like I suppose maybe just this month is an outlier, but I feel like we're working on one a week now. Look, 50, there effectively has been one a week.
50. I mean, I was thinking about this. 50 is one a week. Now that's north and south. So there were 34 in the Republic last year, so under one a week. But there can be spikes. I mean, sadly, that we will go through weeks this year where 2 or 3 people will be murdered. And it's terrible to think about that, but that's the way it goes. But if you look at the statistics, they are quite stable, and I think they've actually probably reduced a bit in recent years. Definitely gun crime has really, really decreased. Gun murders have really decreased in the Republic. No doubt about that.
Yeah. Should we talk briefly about Liam Byrne?
Yes. One of my New Year's resolutions is to try not to curse on this pod. But I was sitting there and I had my what the fudge moment last week when you broke this story on the Irish Mirror about Liam Byrne.
Well, yeah, sometimes you're lucky to hear things and break them. And this is one of those that I heard that I didn't initially believe because I kind of was flabbergasted by it. I went and I checked it out, and I was lucky enough to be able to confirm it, and we published it that day. But I'm still kind of sort of in disbelief that this has happened. Liam Byrne has been released from prison after serving, well, he has served a long time, but only 3 months after being sentenced. When I say served a long time, he's been technically in custody over a year or so, but relative to the sentence that he's been given, not a very long time at all, and relative to when it was handed down. So, to remind people, in case they were living under a rock, obviously, I won't go through the whole detail of it, but Liam Byrne obviously is a senior Kinahan cartel mob boss, considered the number two to Daniel Kinahan at one stage or another, effectively running his criminal organization in Ireland and in the UK. After his brother-in-law, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, was jailed for 21 years for importing €36 million worth of cocaine into the UK. But somehow Liam Byrne got himself caught up in this bizarre firearms conspiracy plot to try and dupe the National Crime Agency in the UK to get Bomber Kavanagh a lesser prison sentence when he was facing that 21-year sentence that I mentioned. And so they deliberately stored firearms up in Newry in County Down and led the PSNI to that stash of weapons. And it was all supposed to look like and sound like Bomber Kavanagh was working with the authorities. But the encrypted encro chat, was broken down by authorities across the globe, and these encrypted chats revealed the entire plot. And Liam Byrne was caught up, and it was central to this plot to try and get weapons from wherever he could find them, and deliberately get them to be found by authorities in order to get his brother-in-law a lesser sentence. So he got caught for that. He was extradited from Spain. He was brought to the UK, and ultimately faced trial in the Old Bailey in London, pleaded guilty. I went over to it, I covered it. And it was a high profile trial. It was major enough in that they shut down a street in London. There were armed police everywhere. It was a big deal, and there was a lot of media interest in it. And Liam Byrne got a 5-year prison sentence for his role in that plot. And then we began to break that down. We discussed on this pod how in the UK, bizarrely enough, your sentence is already cut in half. So he got 2.5 years effectively, of which he'd already served a year. And we estimated that with his sentence that he would probably be out at the end of this year, 2025. But even more extraordinarily still, he has been able to qualify for a type of program that's allowed him to be released even earlier than that. He was released this month, only a couple of weeks ago. But he's under basically a form of house arrest. So he's wearing, I don't know if it's an ankle bracelet, but he is wearing an electronic tag. So they know where he is at all times. He has to keep to a curfew. And if he breaks any of those conditions, he can be brought back to prison effectively. But he is a free man. He's able to leave his house. He's able to be, we believe he's back in Birmingham. He has a house there near Tamworth where Bomber Kavanagh lived. It's quite a nice house. And yeah, out of prison 3 months after being sentenced in a high profile trial. It's extraordinary.
Was that a shock to you?
Yeah, it was. I knew it was going to happen this year, but it was a shock to me that it happened this early. I think our system is, people often criticize the Irish justice system and say that we are not harsh enough on certain sentences. But I mean, in the UK, your sentence automatically cut in half. So I mean, it was a great headline for the NCA and even for us papers to say Liam Byrne jailed for 5 years. He wasn't jailed to anywhere near close to that, So
And in Ireland, your sentence is automatically reduced by 25%. That's standard remission. Now, bits are shaved off. If you act up in prison, you could lose a week or two or whatever. There is enhanced remission. If you're a good boy or a good girl, you can get 33% off. But it's standard 25%, but it's nowhere near the British thing of half, as you say. And I just wonder, is it all to do with that? Do you remember Keir Starmer released hundreds or thousands of prisoners over there, and they're all celebrating with champagne and all that sort of stuff? I wonder, is it the issue with overcrowding. There are serious problems with overcrowding in Ireland, but really, really bad in Britain. And I wonder, is this part got to do with it?
I'd say it has. It's just looking up what the Ministry of Justice told me. It's a home detention curfew scheme. So under that, he has strict license conditions and must be tagged, and kept to a curfew. So that's the conditions of his release. No, he hasn't put anything on social media. I don't know whether he has access to that or is allowed to have access to that. But certainly, he's allowed to leave his house and keep a certain curfew and tell authorities where he is. I think up and until he concludes his sentence, basically.
So he's really keeping a low profile. And from memory, didn't his sentence hearing basically say he's done with crime, he wants to start afresh?
Yeah, his own barrister said that he wanted to live a good, clean life, and he'd put that life that we know of him behind him. Let's hope that that's true. I suppose there were things in that hearing that frustrated me, but you can understand it. It is a different jurisdiction. There were things heard. Like when you plead guilty here in a court in Ireland, they list your previous convictions and they go into your background, pro and con. And the judge considers all of that. But really, I think this judge might not have been aware and wasn't made aware of really who Liam Byrne is and how central he is to a major criminal organization. He was only considering him in the context of what was said in that courtroom, and very little was. And one of the things that really frustrated me, and it's so typical, is that the prosecution were trying to liaise with Garda here in relation to what they thought was one old conviction that Liam Byrne had, but they were not able to confirm it. And they were waiting for the Gardaí to get back to them. And that never really was followed up on. It was just like, oh, he might have this one old conviction, but that's it, basically. Nothing about, the Criminal Assets Bureau, the 1.9 million euro worth of assets taken off him, being named in the High Court, as being a leader of a criminal gang, and other convictions that he actually does have didn't come up. So I felt like they didn't really get the full picture, and he was sentenced on that basis and on his guilty plea and on that fact that he's going to live a good, clean life. These were frustrating things to listen to when covering him for years, who he really is.
And as a veteran Pinko, the Pinko is going to come out in me. Look, he is entitled to try and rebuild his life, and it is possible that he might,
of course,
turn his back on it. And, there are a number of senior criminal heads who have also said they're turning their back on the gang. We think of Declan Brady, for example, Mr. Nobody, who is serving significant sentences in Ireland for 2 or 3 different incidents. He said he's done with the Kinahan gang as well. So look, we'll take the barrister at his word. Maybe he is going to try and go on the straight and narrow when he gets out.
Well, when
he's finished his sentence.
I see already that he appears to be making enemies for himself, because how this sort of initially came out was there was a bit of a kind of a mock-up being done of Liam Byrne, basically suggesting that he had somehow become a tout for MI5. That's what started it all off. But of course, you see these things and you go, it's probably not true. And then you check it out and you go, oh, okay, he is out. So that person obviously knew that Liam Byrne was out, and then it spread like wildfire. But it tells you, doesn't it, that he has enemies that now think, he's obviously a rat and he's talking to the authorities, and that's why he's got a nice clean deal for himself. So
I'll tell you a funny story about that. I got the same thing that you did.
It went around.
Oh, it did. But somebody, a guard sent me it. Somebody sent me it, and I went, "Oh no, absolutely not! Are you talking about?
I didn't
fucking
believe
chance."
it.
I cursed it, and then, so I contacted you. You were across it. I put my feet up. Couldn't believe it when it was true. I was going, Jesus.
I didn't think I would get it confirmed, to be honest. But the MI5 bit we haven't confirmed. We don't know, obviously. But it wouldn't surprise me if people in criminality have certainly thought about and even been approached about cooperating with the authorities, because obviously there are bigger fish to fry. And, the DEA, Garda Síochána, they want to get Daniel Kinahan, Christy Kinahan Senior, and there is a reward, a hefty reward, and an offer of protection, a new alias for yourself, a new life for yourself. I don't know if that's tempting to Liam Byrne, who has lived a life of crime, but certainly I'd say there are people out there that are considering it.
I'd be very surprised if he was involved in any of that. But I will say, generally, lots of criminals do tout. There's this whole thing about when they're interviewed that they pick a spot in the wall like the IRA used to do, IRA volunteers used to do during the Troubles. A lot of criminals talk.
Yeah.
To protect themselves. I mean, they do want to protect themselves, but look, I don't think he'd be involved in that, I'll be honest, because he's too high up.
Yeah, I don't think so. Look, we'll see. Hopefully, he does turn away from a life of crime.
Okay.
Time to see.
What's next, Mr. Haley?
We should talk about the, I suppose, what we've termed the House of Horrors.
Oh, yeah.
I'd just say off the bat, like, there's so much more that we wish we could say about this, but there are multiple reasons why we can't, legal and ethical reasons. But you broke a story in relation to, well, I'll let you talk about it, but in detail. But horrific sexual abuse that has been allegedly going on in a house in the Leinster area for some time, and Garda are investigating this.
Yeah, so it's amazing the way you got to hear about Liam Byrne. It's just, people would be really amazed the way we pick things up. It's not as, sometimes you hear small things, they're small acorns, and suddenly within an hour or two, they've grown into really, really big trees. And I think that happened with this because, and again, I need to be careful. I was told one thing that didn't turn out to be true, but it did help me to establish that there was an investigation underway in a town in Leinster into really, really serious allegations of physical, sexual, God knows what other types of abuse. And I established that 3 men in their 30s and 50s, all the way up, had been arrested. One man was arrested for alleged sexual abuse. One man was arrested on suspicion of neglect. And another man was arrested on suspicion of withholding information. But they were all part of the same investigation. It's a house in the Leinster area. And, people think we make things up. Somebody did say to me, this is a house of horrors. And when somebody says that to you, your attention is piqued and you start digging. And from what the suspicion is, that there was serious abuse going on in that house for quite some time. So we did break that. And then we had a follow-up story that a woman, and again, we'll have to be careful, a woman who has vanished for quite some time would be connected to that house. And the suspicion Garda have is that that woman is dead and has been secretly buried. Now, do you remember we broke the Kieran Durnan story?
Yeah.
And we couldn't name young Kieran for legal reasons. And we're very much... Now, the only way we had cover, really, was when Garda declared a murder investigation, even though they don't have Kieran's body, but Garda would believe the young boy is dead. We're not at that stage with this because Garda obviously had a certain amount of evidence and intelligence with Kieran to declare a murder. And even, there's other cases, say Deirdre Jacob, for example, missing part of Operation Trace in 98, 99 in Newbridge. That's declared a murder. They had evidence. There's not enough evidence for it to be this case to be declared a murder, and there might never be any evidence, but Garda certainly have a belief. So look, the people were released without charge on Tuesday evening. There is a file going to the DPP in relation to the physical and sexual abuse, not in relation to the woman. That is a separate case, but it is certainly one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and people might maybe get frustrated. Why aren't you naming this woman? She's a missing woman, We have done stories on this woman before, and stories have been done on her. But unfortunately, from a legal perspective, now that this story is tied up in a story of sexual abuse, were we to come out and just name this woman in connection with that, we are possibly identifying victims of sexual abuse, and we obviously cannot and would not do that. It becomes a bit complicated, though, doesn't it? If this does turn out to be a murder investigation like the Kieran Durnan situation and say a body is recovered, we'll come across that bridge when we come to it. But that is why, in case people are wondering, because look, nowadays with social media, it doesn't take a detective to work out what we're talking about. But we are bound by different rules to social media, and we cannot say things, not just for legal reasons, for ethical reasons. We're not going to identify victims of abuse.
Look, people probably know this, but whatever we write, we call it legal. So we have eminent solicitors and barristers who don't keep us in check, but hold our hands and make sure we don't get in trouble.
Yeah.
And you don't have that in social media. You don't have people who decide to tweet and go, oh, I'm going to ring my senior counsel friend. Now, thank God we do. And, we would have a certain level of legal knowledge ourselves. You and I would sit there and go, I don't think the solicitor will be happy about this, or I think the solicitor would do this. But we still have to go to them because they know much more about this than we do. They are experts in the field. But people on social media don't have that safety net. And it is a safety net. It can be frustrating for us sometimes, but believe me, as someone who has been through a defamation case from start to finish, it's a massive and very valuable safety net for us. I know it can be a pain, but they are there to protect us. Yeah. But people on Twitter don't have that, or social media, or whatever you want to call it. They just don't have that. So you can see plenty of things being said about any case we do. And it might be frustrating because people on Twitter would say to us, Mike, Paul, why can you not say this? And I'll tell you why we can't say this, because, we're the ones who'll be sued, not you.
Mm-hmm. And just on this case, there have been a few developments which we're reporting today, possibly into tomorrow morning. There is I suppose, a bit of a public gathering happening in the area of where this House of Horrors is later this evening. So we understand residents in the area, obviously, they know the whole story of what's going on and they're not happy about it. And it's on the basis of that the individuals you mentioned that were arrested and released, that they are believed to have tried to make their way back into the house, which is boarded up at the moment. So, they're not supposed to be able to gain entry, but they were attempting to gain entry. So people in the area are not happy about that, and they're gathering, I suppose, in a form of protest, because they're not happy that this is going on in their area. They're more than aware of this missing woman case as well. So yeah, it's there's likely to be developments in this, and Gardaí haven't, just because people have been released doesn't mean the investigation has stopped.
Well, I think we can be sure that a file will be sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions on the House of Horrors section of neglect and that aspect of it. So, it's a very sensitive case, and it's a very complicated case, and it's been going on for quite some time. But a file will be sent to the DPP, and the DPP will decide what happens next, if people should be charged or not, and we're probably best to leave it there.
We probably are. We have a few more things to discuss. I want to just bring up a story that I wrote today in relation to Deirdre Morley, who people may remember 5 years ago this week. Very tragically, 3 children were killed in their home. Carla, Connor and Dara McGinley, all very young children, killed by their mother, Deirdre Morley. Now, Miss Morley ultimately went on trial and she pleaded insanity, and she was found not guilty of murder by reason of insanity. A jury found that. So she was committed to the Central Mental Hospital almost from day one. What date is Friday? The 24th of January 2020. So she's been there since then, but we learned that over the past year or so, she has been getting incremental days out of the Central Mental Hospital. And there are various different stages that you go through. The HSC has this published on their own website. There's level 1, 2, 3, 4. And she is on level 3, meaning that she is getting unaccompanied days out of the CMH. So she previously would have had accompanied days, and now she might get a day out, say to go to a training course or to meet with family or something of that nature, and then she goes back to the CMH. So she's obviously progressing in that sense, in that she is being deemed certainly by her doctors to be fit enough to go out into the outside world. But people will have their reactions to that one way or the other. She wasn't found guilty of murder. She was found guilty. She was being found not guilty by reason of insanity, but she did kill her three children.
Uh, What's interesting, a couple of years ago, not this case, but another case, there was a high profile case of someone who was found not guilty by reason of insanity for another murder. I won't say what it was, but it was very, very grim. And I can remember talking to someone who said to me, there's precedent in another case, and this man will do 5 years or will be kept in hospital for 5 years. So I think that person was quite on the ball. So really, Deirdre Morley is coming to the stage. Now, look, it might be 5.5 years or whatever, but I think she is coming to the stage because there is precedent. It is effectively a 5-year term or period in the hospital.
And I think people, maybe even naively myself, didn't really realize that when you kind of hear about people being committed to the Central Mental Hospital, you have this image in your head that they're going to be there for life or something. Yeah. That's certainly not the case. And while Miss Morley was deemed to be insane at the time of the crime, I might not be deemed to be that now. But look, I'm not qualified to talk about someone's psychological psychiatric care. But certainly there are and have been concerns raised from day one by the children's father, Andrew McGinley. And I think very legitimate concerns that appear to be falling on deaf ears. Obviously, he very sadly is marking the 5th anniversary of his children's death this Friday. But he hasn't stopped fighting to try and have the HSE and the government effectively rewrite policy that allows a co-parent effectively of someone who's suffering from mental health issues to be able to be let in on what's going on with their care when it pertains to their children. And Andrew very much effectively feels that certain decisions were made by clinicians about Deirdre Morley's healthcare that he wasn't looped in on, he wasn't made aware of. And he feels that had he been told those things, he believes his children would still be alive today. He saw no signs that she would be in any way potentially homicidal towards her own children, but he believes that there were signs there that he should have been briefed about, should have been informed about by clinicians, but he wasn't, because their policy is not to, it's patient and doctor confidentiality, and they're not going to disclose that even to her spouse.
Okay, and I often think about that family because I was at the funerals, and it was terrible. And Mr. McGinley spoke very movingly, and it's one of the funerals that I will always remember. I can't believe it's 5 years.
No, it's hard to believe. But I particularly just wanted to bring that issue up because I know Andrew wanted to raise it, and he mentioned 2 other cases to me. You may remember the case of Una Butler and her children, 2010, and he mentioned a case after his own children, the case of Darren Coleman, his baby Henry Coleman. Henry Coleman was killed by his mother, who then killed herself. And it was only it was October 2020. And Andrew has basically said how many more children is it going to take before something is done. Certainly the father of that child also spoke out at the inquest, saying that he should have been able to know about his wife's mental health care. So, this has been raised. Andrew's raised it. I just also want to point out Andrew has done incredible charity work. He's given out over €300,000 to clubs and organisations across the country. So he's been very busy, very active. And if anybody wants to get involved with his charities or help him out, his website is asdaradid.ie. You can look at his Connors Clips page and you'll find all that there. But it's incredible he's been able to do all of that in the midst of senseless tragedy, and also trying to get the government and the HSE to change their policy. No, he's an incredible person.
All murders are horrendous. Familicide or filicide cases are really, really, really grim. I think all the ones we've covered, they're just. I remember that the young Coleman, very, very. It was effectively a baby, a toddler,
Yep.
wasn't he?
Yep.
I remember that. Just really, really grim. Okay, so she's Deirdre Molay is not in custody. She's in the Central Mental Hospital. But I think we should talk about some people who are in custody.
Yeah, first is Joe O'Reilly. He obviously people know murdered his wife Rachel in Knoll in 2004, and I was told by Rachel's family actually that they had been informed by the probation services, the parole board, that he had been refused parole for the fourth time. So this was his fourth attempt at freedom. Incredibly, he's been 17 years in prison, and it's over 20 years since the crime. And he was before the parole board, as were Rachel's family last year. So they've been considering this for some time. But both Joe O'Reilly and Rachel's family were told just this month that he had been refused parole for the fourth time. So Rachel's brother Paul is delighted with that news, as is her mother Rose, and I spoke to them both. And then I subsequently learned that Joe O'Reilly had, I suppose, a bit of a kind of a basically like a debriefing meeting with the parole board and other services, in which he was able to air his grievances. It's about the progression of his sentence, and he feels he's quite arrogant, and he believes that he is being mistreated, that he is being treated differently to other life sentence prisoners. He's annoyed at how much he's in the papers and the infamy of his case, and how effectively he believes he's being treated differently as a result of that, and that he would have progressed much quicker now were it not for the bias he believes there is against him, despite the fact that he is what you would term a model prisoner. But there hasn't been much sympathy for him, so...
Well, it's interesting, and we're going to talk about Joseph Puska in a minute, but I want to raise a story I did. It wasn't the biggest story in the world. It's a guy called Gerard, or also known as Gerald Dunn, who's serving life for murder. He murdered a man in December 1999, and he's been in custody ever since. He's from Crumlin. Liam Thompson was the man he murdered. Now, what's interesting about that is he fell ill in Wheatfield Prison over Christmas. Now, he was close to death for a while, but he recovered. But they were very concerned for him. He collapsed in his cell. He was found unresponsive in his cell. But what's interesting about that is he's been in custody since 1999. Now, we always talk about, the number of years prisoners do, and O'Reilly has been in custody since, I remember, June 2007 when he was convicted. So what's interesting about Dunn is how long he has been in prison, and he's not been moved to an open prison. I think he was for a while, but he's back in Wheatfield. So he's done almost 20, it'll be 26 years by the end of this year. So It just goes to show you there are an awful lot of lifers who do more than 20 years in prison.
Yeah, and I'd say Joe O'Reilly will do 30 plus,
Yeah.
But it's very much how you get on in there and how you progress and how you acknowledge what you've done, and Joe O'Reilly hasn't acknowledged what he's done. And neither has Joseph Puska, who I'll talk about briefly. I had a story about Joseph Puska. Obviously, it was coming up there just a week and a half ago, the anniversary of the horrific murder of Aisling Murphy in Tullamore, County Offaly. Obviously, Joseph Puska was jailed for life in 2023, and he's been in the Midlands prison ever since. So I put a few feelers out, and I learned a bit about how he's been getting on behind bars. And I'm told that he is now being housed in the base or landing of the Midlands prison, which is predominantly an area full of sex offenders, rapists. There are a couple of life sentence prisoners there, but he's effectively been deliberately housed with sex offenders because, I suppose, of the sexual motive of his crime, and also I think for his own protection, because I think there are plenty of people who would probably want to do him harm even in prison. I mean, what he did is probably one of the most heinous and well-known crimes in the country, and his life is in danger as a result of that. I'm told he's gained a lot of weight, and that he spends his day, would you believe, learning how to speak English. Now, that obviously has enraged a lot of people, because Joseph Puska has actually been in our country since 2013, during which time he never really got a great grasp on English and never really worked as effectively. And there are people have a lot of strong feelings about that. Now he gets to sit down in front of a tutor on a weekly basis and literally be taught how to speak English. Now, what good that'll do him? He's not getting out of prison, you know.
So he's piled on a lot of weight behind bars. There's a fella, a really evil man called Roy Whiting,
Oh
serving
yeah.
time, child sex killer in England, and it's one of the most striking photographs I've ever seen. His mugshot when he was convicted of he kidnapped and raped a young girl. His mugshot shot. He looked like a normal fella, right? Then a couple of years later, he was let out of prison, or he's brought from prison to attend court and appeal or something, and he was unrecognizable. I'd urge people to go and Google pictures of him. He had grown his hair, he'd lost some of his teeth, he'd put on weight. You wouldn't have thought it was the same fella. So maybe,
Wow.
prison does that, but he was the change in Roy Whiting was absolutely striking behind bars. But no sympathy for him. Monster.
No. And look, I mean, the family of Aisling Murphy did a wonderful tribute to her out there. There's a beautiful shrine to her out in Cappancur where she was murdered just by the riverside there. And they gathered there. Her father and friends played music there, and her boyfriend Ryan Casey. They were all, I mean, they've been doing charity work like Mr. McGinley as well, and they've probably not thought about Joseph Puska much, but you look, it's a crime I don't think we'll ever soon forget. I want to briefly talk about Conor McGregor, because what would a Shot at Lies podcast be without Conor McGregor at this point? I felt like I was experiencing deja vu there. I was in the civil court there again only a couple of weeks ago now, coming to the conclusion of this trial that captivated, I suppose, the country for a couple of weeks. And basically, in a nutshell, McGregor now has to pay Kinahan €100,000 straight up of the 248,000 that he is to award her in damages. He also has to pay 200,000 of the legal bills of Miss Hand, following a ruling by Judge Jones. But there's been a stay placed on the rest of it until he lodges his appeal. But I don't know if there's going to be an appeal, or certainly not, on the grounds that were kind of floated in court there the other day, because Mr. Justice Alexander Owens, look, I mean, he's a pretty vocal judge, but I would say he effectively laughed off what Remy Farrell, the senior counsel for Mr. McGregor, put forward, and effectively told him that he didn't think he had a chance on very specific legal grounds. One of them is in relation to the no comment answers that McGregor gave to Garda and over the 100 questions he was asked in the Garda station. And there was basically a lot of back and forth in that in the courtroom. I won't bore people, but there was something called a voir dire, which is a legal discussion that happened outside of the jury. And there's an argument over that, and basically they want to rehash that again in a new trial. So that's one of the arguments, for example. So he hasn't really come forward with a typical ground of appeal just yet. And as we mentioned, he has 25 days in which to launch that from the court date that we've just had on the 16th. So when we're coming to the start of February there, we might know whether McGregor is going to lodge his appeal or not, but he hasn't so far. So
Did I read somewhere that he's said he's running for president?
yeah, he probably said that, yeah.
All right, that'll be fun.
I despair. Well, look, I know nothing about politics, but I think you do need an awful lot of nominations from councillors, of which I don't think he would get. But look,
Yes.
you never know.
There was someone in 2016. Someone was trying to get elected president, and she had to go to various. You have to go to councils. It's either members of the Oireachtas, a certain number, or a certain number
Yes.
of councils. So, well, good luck, Mr. McGregor, with that.
Yeah, and I see that he is, as of the recording of this podcast, rubbing shoulders with Donald Trump's cabinet. And I think I don't know if it's real or not, but there's a screenshot of him apparently on a phone call with Melania. So he's certainly trying to rub shoulders with the Trump cabinet and the Trump team. And that's the kind of company that he wants to keep. He's also being sued in the United States for alleged sexual assault. A woman is alleging that he brought her into a bathroom during an NBA game and sexually assaulted her there. Similar to Nikita Han, police are not taking any action on relation to that, but it's going to a civil case. I actually spoke to her lawyer, who commended Nikita Han for her bravery against high odds. He said so.
No, I'm not making any judgment. I'm just pointing out. I think that the police there decided quite quickly not to proceed with it.
It's sorry, to be clear, it's different from here, where there was a full Garda investigation and a recommendation, and the DPP said no. On this, again, America's a different system, but the police there said that there was nothing to take it to a criminal charge, and they didn't. The police investigation was quite short. People might remember that during that alleged incident, McGregor actually did a stunt where he punched a mascot by the name of Byrne, and he punched him too hard, so the mascot actually had to go to hospital. A very strange incident, but look, nonetheless, it's the second time that he's been accused now of sexual assault, of which he obviously denies, and his lawyers are fighting that, but he's never out of the news, and we'll continue to cover him wherever he goes.
Let's see what 2020.
Whenever he's accused of crimes, that is. I'm not interested in him otherwise.
Let's see what 2025 brings. Right, that very, very last one, very quickly. Garda baseball caps.
Yeah, I mean, God, it's great that they're finally getting them. What do you make of them?
Oh, we had it up in the Mirror online on Tuesday. I got a wee tip that it was coming. They're going to be in force on Friday for all uniform members. Some specialist units already have various baseball caps. I keep on saying baseball bats in my head. Various baseball caps, but the regular, as we'd call them, the frontline units are all going to have. They're going to be replacing the venerable peaked cap with this new baseball cap. It's dark blue and it's got the huge big Garda crest on the front. If you want to have a look at it, you go and see them on my Twitter or on the Irish Mirror page. We did a story about it. I quite like it, but of course, guards are divided on it. Some like it, some don't. What do you got to do?
Well, I think people may not realise. This is one of the, I suppose, well, we would probably call it Mickey Mouse issues that has come up again and again and again at the annual GRA conferences every year. But how many years? People may not realise how difficult it actually has been for Gardaí to lobby and ultimately finally get a cap. I probably for the last 10 years at least of attending and covering these conferences, have they brought up motions? We need to ask the Garda Commissioner to give us caps, and now finally after but did they do a trial scheme of these as well before they actually let them wear them?
They did. A couple of points. The PSNI have had them for quite some time, and if you go abroad, I think the Policía Nacional and the Guardia Civil in Spain have them. The world keeps turning, so it's not going to be a game changer. However, they are keeping the peaked cap and the uniform, the shirt and tie, the old shirt and tie, for ceremonial events and, funerals and that sort of stuff. So when there are formal events, they'll have their peaked cap. But when you see them out and about, they'll be wearing these baseball caps.
Well, I think people have a little sympathy for the average everyday guard who has to stand out at a scene for hours on end, and they're freezing cold or they're too warm, depending on the ridiculous uniform that they're forced to sometimes wear when it's not friendly to the weather that they're in. So at least they get to wear these caps and they're a bit more appropriate.
And a very, very final point, there's also, we had it in the Mirror as well on the same story, there's also a new uniform or whatever, or biker gear for the Garda motorcyclists in the road policing unit. The one they had, it's the leathers and it's very, very good, and it protects you, but you swelter on a hot day. This new material, they cost about 1,200 quid each, the full gear. Very, very high tech. They're being trialled in the roads policing unit, I think in Dublin, for the bikers, and they're very, very happy with them. So that'll be rolled out as well, if the trial is a success.
Yeah, these fucking trials. I think it's amazing the process they have to go through just to be able to change their uniform. But look, I'd say there's a lot of happy guards, maybe some who aren't. But anyway, listen, thank you very much for listening to us. And this was probably a bumper edition because we had so much built up over the past month that we haven't got to talk about. But yeah, we'll continue to do a weekly podcast, either Wednesdays or Thursdays, maybe sometimes Fridays. But we'll try to give you a podcast every single week on the Week in Crime. So thank you very much.
And if there are any big issues, we did a daily one during the, I think, Murphy trial, Joseph Puska trial, and Conor McGregor's civil trial. So if there are big ones throughout the year, we might look at that.